Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to say how excited I am to be able to share the experience of the Mali Elephant Project with such a wonderful room of inspiring people. I'd like to thank Vance for his faith through some difficult times and his vision, and also our partners in for the Mali Elephant Project, the International Conservation Fund of Canada, and Anne, Tom, and Sarah are here with us today. Where you are now. Yes. Unfortunately, my field manager, Nombaganame, can't be with us today. His visa didn't come in time. He's really sorry not to be with us, but he sends a message. He wishes to send his greetings to everybody, say that it's a meeting like this and people like this who give him hope, and that he is with us in spirit. So this is a picture of a very key place in the elephant range. It's Lake Banzena, taken by a very talented photographer, Carlton Ward, who's also provided us with a lot of the pictures of elephants, which you'll be seeing. Yes. At the moment, before I start on telling our story, I just want to remind us that in the time that it takes for me to give this presentation, the current rate of elephant slaughter is that one elephant will have been killed for its ivory. And it's events like in last year, 2012, poachers killed between 300 and 450 elephants in a matter of weeks in Cameroon's Bouboundjida National Park. This really gives us cause for concern. And there's been a new concept that's been coined, a new phrase, blood ivory, where you have groups like Al-Shabaab and Janjaweed and Lord's Resistance Army that are actually turning to elephants because of the high prices of ivory to fund these armed conflicts. So when in 2011 Tuareg mercenaries returned from Libya, heavily armed, and the Tuareg rebellion was reignited, this was followed shortly by a coup in March 2012 when government retreated completely from the elephant range and the area became completely lawless, overrun by armed groups and full of young men, heavily armed. Imagine my consternation. What can we do in the face of such huge forces? We didn't even have any kind of anti-poaching ability. But the elephants needed us more than ever. We had to stay there and try to do something. And the only people that we could turn to were the community. And in this presentation, I'm going to tell the story of this. But up till now, only 7 out of 550 elephants have been killed. And that has been entirely due to the community. But before I tell that story, I just want to give a background of this 11-year project to give you an idea of why that was possible. So when we started in 2002, 2003, the first thing to do was try to understand this elephant migration. How had these elephants survived when all the other elephants on a similar latitude in the Sahel had disappeared? What was it about these elephants? And so Vance raised some money and brought in Save the Elephants, who did, over 3 years, studied the population. This is the ground team, identifying individual elephants to try and get an idea of their population size. And we had some GPS collar data. First of all, with 3 elephants, first campaign, and then later 9 elephants. And it's my task to interpret this data. This is the data from 3 elephants, all in different colors, superimposed on a satellite image. You can see the river Niger, the green kind of loop to the north, to the top of the slide, the Niger Delta to the west, and the red line is a road that kind of goes through the elephant range, dividing it in 2. And there's a map in the corner that shows you where we are in Africa. And what we found was that there's a big circular annual migration. It's the longest migration of any elephants. But you can see it's very unusual in that the elephants concentrate in one area, then they dash on to another one, and they concentrate there, dash on to another area. And it was this pattern of movement, together with satellite images, that helped us decipher how they'd managed to survive. So in the north of the range, this is a typical scene of the north of the range, Banzena's in the distance. We have dunes overlain on laterite, and so you have little chains of water, of lakes and water holes surrounded by forest, because that was the only place where the trees were growing, and linked by drainage ways. And this is where the elephants would spend the dry season, because they needed the water. Mostly in the forests, hidden, they're difficult to find, and they get shelter too. This is Lake Banzena. As the lakes dry up through the dry season, they all converge on this one sole source of water that's available to them at the end of the dry season. This is Lake Banzena. And so once the wet rains come, they go to the south of the range, where the food is very good forage, much better rainfall, but there's no surface water. So basically their migration is determined by the seasons and moving to get food and water. But it's not the whole story, because as you can see, there are little clouds of points, and that made me think, why are these clouds of points so tight? And this is a whole story, but just a brief little vignette. The cloud in the southwest of the range, that is there because a local powerful chief is a pastorist, and he defended that area from fields. So in effect, he provided a haven for elephants. So what we discovered was their internationally important population represent 12% of all West African elephants, most northerly, and they undertake its long migration. Lake Banzena was the late dry season water and top priority. But how do you conserve this population when there are 2 forester posts to cover this area, which is about the size of Switzerland? There's no vehicles, we had no money. The culture of conservation in Mali is bottom of the pile as far as the government's concerned. Nobody's interested. All the wildlife's shot out. So we didn't have a very easy environment to start with. What could we do? So we thought, well, what we have to do is first build a consensus within Mali around elephant conservation. So we identified every single group that has any impact on these elephants at all. And we went to talk to them. So we have government agencies and projects, we have the tourism industry, and most importantly, we have the local communities. And we identified the schools, the grassroots, community leaders, and we just went and talked to them all. We presented them with our findings, and we said, what do you think of this? Is this right? How does this gel with your experience? What is your experience? And what can you tell us more? And we learnt lots of fascinating stuff, and that gave us the kind of the social context. And it also enabled us to develop a whole load of outreach materials. Oh, this is one of our workshops with the local community leaders, and at the bottom there you see one of the breakout groups where we're asking them, how do you experience elephants, what can we do about them? I must say, when we did this, my heart was in my mouth, because they might have said, well, we hate them, we don't want them, and then what can you do? But actually they said, well, we want elephants. If elephants disappear, it means that the ecosystem is no longer good for us. So we don't want elephants to disappear. And that I found very striking, because it's not the kind of advanced answer you'd get in a more developed community. So here are some of the outreach materials. We did a schools information pack and kit. We trained teachers how to deliver it. We did materials for the local community, for tourists. And we built gradually, and the government, we built this consensus about the future of elephants. And the Malians and the local people were particularly excited by the fact that the elephants were special. Then, whilst we were busy doing all this, disaster struck. Lake Banzena dried. Through the 90s and the 2000s, the cattle using the lake had just grown exponentially, out of all proportion. And the lake dried before the end of the dry season. It was clear we had to do something. But what could we do? Still had no real money or resources. The conventional approach had been tried twice, clearing everybody out, because it is, in theory, a protected area. It had never been enforced. But they just came back again over the next few months. That was not working. And so we went and we interviewed every single household and asked them about their lives and their problems and how they felt about elephants. And we found some very surprising findings. One of them, some of them are just here, some of the most important ones. The local cattle, the cattle around the lake that we'd assumed were part of this increasing, human population, 96% of them actually belonged to people living hundreds of kilometers away in the river towns, who gathered, when they had the professional people, the politicians, the business people, who would put their money into cattle and then send them off with a herder to go and find pasture. And these herds were growing enormously. The other thing we discovered was over 50% of the population was suffering from waterborne disease, and they were ready to move from the area if they could have somewhere else that had clean water and pasture. This was a complete surprise to us. We also found there was a very high degree of resource exploitation, not by the local people, but again, commercial interests coming from the towns and just cleaning out everything they could find. And so we brought all the community together and we had long meetings, we discussed our findings, and the first thing to do was to unite all the diverse ethnicities and clans around a common understanding of the problem. And then we asked them, well, what do you think should be done? Now we have this problem. And they said, well, we will move outside the elephant range if we can have a place with clean water and pasture. And so that's what we did. We raised money for one borehole, and then the Malian government funded the other two. But there was also a more fundamental problem that was not specific to Banzena, but the whole of the Goma, and that is that there are many ethnicities. They all have their systems of natural resource management, but they won't obey each other's. So what you effectively have is a free-for-all, because a Fulani won't obey the rules of a Tuareg. So by bringing all the ethnicities together to agree, we brought them all together to agree a system of resource management that they would all respect. And this was a management committee that determines the limits, how resources are used. It protected all the elephant range, all the key elephant forests, and then the levels of use for the rest outside. So this is the management committee plus a few extras who have leaped into the photo. And then the younger men formed these brigades, which would go patrolling to check that the regulations were being obeyed. And uniquely, they worked with foresters. The foresters gave them armed backup, and they provided extra coverage for the foresters. They were the ears and eyes. And we trained them in forestry law, so they were also enforcing national Malian law. So this is a map of the elephant range. These are the elephant locations showing all 12 elephants that were collared. And that green area is the first thing that the management committee did was to put aside an area of reserve pasture, and that's the green there. And the adjacent committee of 400,000 hectares, and adjacent communities thought this was such a good idea. They did the same. So we ended up with an area of nearly 1 million hectares. And they determined the rules of use. And in the top left there is showing the delimitations of this reserve pasture. Here they are making fire breaks to protect it, because one of the big problems here is most of the grass, most of the resources goes up in flames every year. So they drag thorn trees to make the guideline, and then a team of people are clearing the vegetation behind that guideline. And this is the result. And when adjacent communities saw this result, that so much pasture had been reserved, we now have them clamoring to, asking us to help them do the same. So that was a little background, and because of the success and the popularity of this, we got enormous government backup all the way through, and it in fact changed the culture within government, because the people who were keen and concerned, our allies, who had been able to identify this process, actually sort of were able to do something through us, and they actually rose through the ranks. So we started with an uninterested, ineffective people all through the conservation division, and by the time we'd ended, we had the really good people in key positions. So it's interesting how that had that knock-on effect. So we come to the coup. What do? We had a community meeting, brought them all together. Their concerns were they couldn't get grain because all the vehicles were hijacked. They couldn't, and they were concerned about their young men, like Ian and Zerki was saying. And we were concerned about the elephants. So we helped them get grain by bringing donkeys. And we also recruited their young men to form an extension to the brigades. We paid them in food only, but they were our information network. So any elephant killings, they would find out who did it, where the ivory was, everything about them. And they also helped the brigade in their activities. And of these 520 young men, none of them joined the jihadis, despite payments of $50 a day for joining up and being given a firearm. And the result is that, as I said, only 7 elephants out of 550 were killed all this time up to now. These are the communities with whom we work now, and going into the future, we're extending these information networks, extending all this, trying to keep up with demand. It's an example of rewilding, because once we've got this area secured by these community actions, we can then introduce all kinds of species of the fauna that was lost, and that is actually our intent. Is it an example of nature needs half? Depends where you draw the boundaries, obviously, but we brought all the communes, these are the administrative commune boundaries, we've brought all these together, and there's been an intercommunal convention which protects all the elephant range, complete protection. And the rest of it, we're working with communities to make systems for. All the way through this, we've tried every action. We've tried to find a law, a Malian law, that supports it. So we use decentralization legislation, we use agriculture and livestock. The pastoral reserves are actually livestock legislation to support, to give teeth to all these community initiatives. And so, really, I suppose, if there's one message, was we were completely unable to come in with a solution. And so we had to step back, build a vision, and then identify what were the assets that we had on the spot. We had a system that was producing an undesirable result, and that was resource degradation and threats to elephants. And we had to try and shift that system by reconfiguring those relationships and empowering those allies so that the emergent result would be a system that sustains elephants and restores the ecosystems, because that's actually what's happening. And so that is what, the result is a sustainable solution. And I suppose for me, I'm so used to work in urban cultures, conservation is regarded as some kind of optional extra, something that would be nice if we can afford it. Whereas in fact, it's at the heart of sustainability. All sustainability, conservation, nature is at the heart of it. That's something we try to convey in our book, provide the arguments for that. And thank you very much for your attention.